Well, thank you for joining us. We do have a few more people that are popping in, so we'll let them do that, but I don't want to delay us too much as we begin this next stop in our Sooners Around the World series here. So welcome. We're so excited to have all of you. I think at this point we have 135. That's a great turnout. And welcome to my guests that you're seeing here, I believe, Lester Asamoah, but I'll get to that in a second. My name is Rebecca Cruz. I'm really happy to have you here. I serve as the Associate Dean for the College of International Studies at the University of Oklahoma. And I'm really excited to be part of this edition of Sooners Around the World, which is a new initiative that started last year by the Office of Alumni Engagement, where they're attempting to bring together some of the 260,000 alumni and give them a chance to check in on some of our alums around the world and really enhance that global community of OU alums. So we're really excited to have you here and hope to see you in future editions as well. So just as a way of kind of starting us off, let me take you back a decade. 10 years ago in May or June of 2012, I had the privilege of taking the first group of President's Leadership Class students to our campus, or it wasn't really a center yet, it was just starting, but our center in Arezzo, Italy. This is the first time we took this particular group of freshmen, the end of their freshman year. There were 25 incredible students. And we were kind of piloting the program to see if this was going to be effective. I should mention that 11 years later, 10 years later, we do still have this particular program. But on that trip, there were 25 excellent students, and we went and saw all the sites of Italy, as well as met with a variety of leaders. It was, again, after all, a leadership class, and incredible students. But after every place we went and every meeting we went to, I could always count on a voice on my right asking me a series of questions. What does this mean? What should we do? What could I do in the future? What should my career be? What should my major be? What do you think about that? That sense of curiosity. And I started really looking forward to that at each stop. Well, that voice was none other than Lester Asamoah, who is our guest today. And 10 years later, he has left OU, he has seen various parts of the world, and he is serving abroad for the US government. But before we get into that and hear from him, let me give you his official bio. Lester Asamoah is an economic officer at the U.S. Embassy in Jakarta, Indonesia. So it is very late there, I believe, Lester, very early, depending on how you're looking at things. He has been covering macroeconomic analysis, the financial structure, sector, infrastructure coordination. Prior to that, he served as the consular officer at the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City, where he also met with OU students who were studying abroad there at our center. Prior to entering the Foreign Service, he served as a Pickering Fellow, or was selected as a Pickering Fellow, a very prestigious recognition. And during that time, he interned at the U.S. Embassy in Hanoi, Vietnam, as well as the State Department's Operations Center. So lots of great experiences there. Lester also during his Pickering was able to earn his master's in international development from American University in Washington, D.C. And he, of course, earned a bachelor's from the University of Oklahoma in international and areas studies. He's originally from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. He speaks Spanish, he's learned Indonesian, and he used to study Arabic. And I should also mention that just last week, he was named as one of Oklahoma's Next Gen's 30 Under 30 recipients, another great honor. So enough from me, Lester. I'm gonna hand the virtual platform over to you so you can tell us about your life this last decade since you were a student at OU.
Well, thank you, Dr. Cruz, so much for the introduction. Very humbled, very excited to join you all. And yeah, greetings from Jakarta, Indonesia. So it's it's midnight here, but I am very excited and energized to be able to share a little bit about myself, and then hopefully answer whatever questions you have, and just share a little bit more about not only my life, but as well some culture of Indonesia, a little bit more about Jakarta, the capital, and so forth. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started. I might occasionally look at my agenda just because there's so many different topics. I want to make sure I'm staying on schedule. So please forgive me if I look down just for a few moments here and there. But yeah, as Dr. Cruz mentioned, I was born and raised in Oklahoma, went to Moore High School, and both my parents are immigrants from Ghana. So in terms of the initial phases of why I ended up in the job that I ended up in as a foreign service officer is in large part because I gained appreciation for what the United States did for my family, the opportunities it provided, and I've always kind of been a service-oriented person. One thing before I forget, foreign service officer is a fancy way to say that I'm a U.S. diplomat. So as Dr. Cruz mentioned, I worked in Mexico City in the U.S. Embassy and currently working in Jakarta. So just want to put that point out there for get a little bit past the bureaucracy speak. So yeah, I, as Dr. Cruz mentioned, studied in the International Area Studies college, and during my time at OU, I really thrived. Had great opportunities, as Dr. Cruz mentioned, to go to Italy, as well as study abroad in Jordan as a part of doing Arabic. And yeah, I can't say enough. I know a lot of you joining us today are students that are interested in this topic. And I just can't say enough about the opportunities that OU has out there if you're willing to, and able to take eventually them just in that. And for me, I asked a lot of questions. As Dr. Cruz mentioned, I would always ask her, Dr. Gerlot, and various other professors about what to do next and how to like really angle, right? The thing about OU and Oklahoma in general is, of course, I mean, I can't say enough of how much I love the people in the state and all the great things that are happening. But at the same time, you know, we are kind of far from the federal government. And so you kind of have to figure out like, how do I get those linkages? How do I make these connections? And so that was my method to get to where I am now in many ways, just asking questions. And you don't know what you don't know, but gosh darn it, I found some answers by just trying to ask over and over again. So yeah, I'm happy to talk more about OU on the back end if people have questions about my experience, but I kind of want to move along a little bit because we have a lot more to cover. So after I graduated from OU, I went immediately to grad school at American University in DC, where I studied international development, as Dr. Cruz mentioned, and very different experience from going from my major was international security at OU to development. In some ways, they work hand in hand, right? When you're thinking about like security writ large, you're thinking about how national security policy affects everybody and what ways we can tweak that policy to make it a safer world, safer nation in the case of the United States. And then development policy, of course, correlates with how do we best distribute aid, how have we frankly not done aid well, what can we do better? And so I'm just very curious and interested in like the how do we use economic policy and how do we understand economics in a way that's going to benefit people? That's a really, really vague and broad thing, but certainly I try to take those skills into my job now and looking at different economic programs and opportunities that we have. And I'll also touch on more of my current role in a little bit, but journey was great at AU as well. Can't say enough for the same with OU, just a great institution full of great people, and also happy to talk about grad school. And I could have a whole other webinar on just international affairs grad school, what to think about, what your interests are, and how to navigate that. But I'm happy to touch on that as well later on in the Q&A. So as Dr. Cruz mentioned, I was a Thomas R. Pickering Fellow. So that's one of the State Department's Foreign Affairs Fellowships. And if you are interested in this career path, I encourage you to look into it. The fellowship targets underrepresented folks, but that does certainly mean people from Oklahoma, right? Because when you look at the diplomatic service, traditionally it's been people from the East and West coasts, and we really don't have a ton of colleagues from the Midwest, from the South, that are, in the service, but we need to be representative of all of America, right? So please do look that up. And then there's also other fellowships as Charles Rangel, which is the sister fellowship of the Thomas Pickering one. Both of those, super briefly, how they work is you get your graduate school paid for, and then you do a domestic and an overseas internship for the Pickering, and then for the Rangel, you intern in Congress, then do an overseas internship. And during that process, you do the Foreign Service test, and they help prepare you for a career in life in the Foreign Service. So it's kind of it's a bit intense to do that all whilst doing grad school, but very much worth it. And they have a couple of other fellowships. Donald Payne for folks that are interested in international development to enter the USAID, so U.S. Agency for International Development. They have a foreign service core of people that go out to different countries and make sure aid programs that taxpayers are, paying for are being well distributed and well run. And then they're starting to create now. Secretary of State just announced in a thing that they're creating a fellowship for civil servants, so people who work in State Department headquarters in Washington D.C. who are kind of our specialists on different foreign policy topics. So whether it's like sanctions policy or non-proliferation, which non-proliferation is like, preventing nuclear weapons or other just spread of weapons, peace talks, women and genders issues as it relates to preventing violent conflict, or how that fits into other different topics like economics and how women disproportionately face challenges in that, etc. So there's a lot of great topics that are covered by the civil servants, and those folks stay in headquarters and don't travel as much. So that was kind of a bit of an aside on that. So I just wanted to really plug those fellowships for people that are interested, and also just happy to answer questions on that. But so I'll talk a little bit about after I graduated from grad school. So then I entered the Foreign Service, and without getting into too deep of a story about entry and whatnot, I entered in orientation actually almost 5 years ago. And during orientation, a 6-week crash course essentially of how to be a diplomat and how to work at an embassy, etc. And I was assigned to Mexico City, where consular officer means that I worked on visas. So people from Mexico who wanted to go to the United States to work, to study, to do business, to etc. Like I was one of the people interviewing them, 120 interviews in Spanish every day. It's a lot. But I want to focus on Jakarta, so don't dive deeper into that. But consular work consists of visa work as well as helping out American citizens in need. And super quick plug on Mexico is I hope you all get the chance to go down there. We have, of course, Dr. Cruz mentioned, he has a center in Puebla, Mexico, which is a fantastic place. And in general, I didn't know much about Mexico till I got assigned there. And it's a beautiful country, just wonderful gastronomy, great just culture, a lot of things to learn and about how Mexico and Mexicans view the United States. And encourage you all, if you get the chance to go, particularly outside the tourist areas, and really check out what Mexico has to offer. But all right, no, from Mexico, then I made my way to Jakarta and to what I do now as economic officer. And to elaborate slightly on that, of what I do now, economic officers, we're trying to first understand what's going on when it comes to the economic context. So what kind of policies that are what kind of policies came out with each government, or that might affect U.S. business interests, that might affect different political considerations. We're going with the ambassador, our deputy chief of mission, and other officials to meetings. And we have senior officials from Congress, from State Department, from the White House, etc. We set up the travel. We make sure they get the meetings they need to advance U.S. foreign policy priorities. And we send out what we call diplomatic cables. So kind of reports on what's happening and how we review certain things, or if we are tasked to figure out something, and that goes to policymakers in Washington that then set the policy direction and so forth. Very packaged in description of that, but I'm happy to elaborate on that as well later on. So I'm really enjoying it. And in the embassy, we have a lot of different functions too. I mean, political, economic are kind of the two most well-known ones, but there's consular folks, there's people who are in what we call the management section that help keep the building running. And then we have public affairs, so people who go out and run cultural programs, who manage our relationship with the press and the country that we're in. So a lot of different functions there. But yeah, I kind of want to get to Jakarta because I know that's why some of you are here, right? Kind of get a little bit of sense of what is going to happen in Jakarta and what's going on in Indonesia. I find that certainly for me, when I was assigned here, I didn't know a lot about Indonesia, even though it's quite a big country and has a lot of significance in the region. So if you all don't mind, I'm going to share my screen to have a few videos, or sorry, a few pictures rather, that will kind of help illustrate some points, and then some pictures from my travels as well around Jakarta and Indonesia. So even though it's been a couple years doing Zoom, I still, and hopefully I'm not going to mess this up. Okie dokie. All right. So first, I just want to share where Indonesia is, right? So Indonesia is in Southeast Asia, and it is due northwest of Australia, and kind of between Australia and the peninsular part of Southeast Asia. So you see Thailand, it borders Malaysia actually. Indonesia and Malaysia share Borneo Island. Excuse me. Then there's Philippines in the mix there, but just so this is kind of where we're at. So Jakarta is actually south of the equator, and I'm 12 hours away from Oklahoma. So geographically, just about as far as you physically can get from from Oklahoma. But yeah, so I just want to frame that. So Indonesia has about 275 million people, right? That's huge, right? And we don't really talk about it much in the US. And it's just, when I started learning more about Indonesia, I was like, how do we not, what's going on? So Indonesia is a huge country, and with 275 million people, that makes it, I believe, the fourth most populous country, right? So you have India, China, the United States, and then Indonesia. And then in terms of democracy, that's one of our big talking points is, Indonesia is one of the world's largest democracies as well. So it's third after India, United States. And then it's the world's largest Muslim, or it's the most populous Muslim majority country. So Indonesia doesn't have an official state religion, but ballpark, so there's varying estimates, but ballpark of 80% of Indonesians are Muslim. And there's other, with all the islands you see there's so many different belief systems and different varying cultures. Another topic we could go into another separate talk about, but there's about 17,000 islands. And outside of Islam, Christianity is practiced. There's also Hinduism. So Bali, which is an island you might have heard of, probably the most famous island because of the tourism and whatnot. So that's a Hindu island. And that's kind of a theme, is some of the islands tend to be one religion. And but the major islands, of course, are generally Muslim. So that's kind of framing Indonesia here. And so this is Jakarta. So Jakarta is a big city. There's about 10 million people that live in the city limits and 30 million that are in the metro area. Can you imagine? 30 million people, that's that's huge, right? That's several states combined. Probably most of the Midwest combined would get to Jakarta. My neighborhood I live in, I think there's more people than the state of Oklahoma. It's absolutely mind-boggling to think about. And then so I have some other quick stats here that I'm going to talk about the history. So Jakarta was founded in 1527, June 22nd, 1527, as Jayakarta. So this was way back when. And Jayakarta comes from Sanskrit, which basically means victory, right? And this victory was won by Fathahillah, who's a national hero who came from Western Jakarta, or Western Indonesia, as we know now. And during that time, Jayakarta was held by Portuguese businessmen and just general Portuguese outposts. And so then Fathahillah came in, defeated the Portuguese, and established Jayakarta. And so that's kind of, in a lot of ways, the origin story of Islam in West Java and in Jakarta writ large. So that's important. He's a national hero. And then 1619, moving a little bit forward, that is when the Dutch came in and took over Jayakarta and then turned it into Batavia. So Dutch colonization went for a pretty long time in Indonesia, but there's actually not a ton of Dutch influence in the same way that other societies that were colonized have, right? So the Dutch are largely hands-off in some ways. That another thing we could go into deep history on, but there's still some words in the official language, Bahasa Indonesia, that are Dutch. Then there's some architectural references, but for the most part, it's really there's so many different cultures that have all kind of like been independent for a long time and kind of broke away from any sort of Dutch influence. But so the Dutch were colonizers from 1619 to 1942. So it was quite a long period. And so then in 1942, Japan, Imperial Japan occupies Indonesia, and then they take over Batavia, change the name to Jakarta. And then in 1945 is when Indonesia declares independence. So it's August 17th, 1945, which is significant because that just happened, right? Like the 77th anniversary is pretty recent. And the reason I go into all that history is Jakarta is celebrating its 495th birthday. So they do this whole big celebration. They go around and they have like all these cultural displays, and we have the 495 everywhere, 495 celebrations. So even though the country gained independence 77 years ago, they still celebrate the continuous like presence of people here in Jakarta. So here's a couple of other pictures. So this one's actually not a stock picture. Sorry, I'm mixing some stock pictures. You know, when you live somewhere, you know, we take all the touristy pictures, and I arrived during COVID, so I didn't really tour around a lot. So, but I have some of my own and then some stock, but this is my own. It's a nice sunset over part of the city. It was a great day, not a lot of pollution. And so I just wanted to share that. Just another kind of view from the city. And there's many great city vistas, a lot of nice little, you know, bars and restaurants on top of buildings and whatnot. And here's what we call Merdeka. Merdeka is in Bahasa is Independence. So Independence Square, that's the Independence. I would call it the National Monument. So that was built a few years after independence as a way to, of course, kind of declare. See, of course, it's like an obelisk similar to what we have in the United States. So I thought that was kind of cool. The embassy is not very far from it, so I always like to see it. I'm like, oh yeah, it's a little piece of similarity there. So this is Old Town, a picture of Old Town. So a part of Jakarta has like an, of course, like a kind of the Dutch colonial headquarters, and after those were vacated, a lot of those buildings are still preserved. So people can go around, and there's like some of the old Dutch restaurants and cafes are still there. So that's a cool part. If you're ever in Jakarta, that's definitely a thing to do for sure, is to check out this area. And they have like a big canal that's kind of like goes through it. It's quite nice. So if you're ever in Jakarta, Merdeka Square and this are kind of the two big highlights of like being here and checking out touristy scenes. So this is the embassy. As you can see, our U.S. embassy is quite big, and it's a brand new building. It was just opened in 2019 after occupying an old building for many, many years. So this is where I go to work every day. It's quite nice. I'm very fortunate to be able to do that here. And so you're wondering, why is it so big? We have about 1,000+ people working there. So in addition to American diplomats like myself, we have people who are, we say, locally employed staff, or people who are from Indonesia that help us with the variety of things that need to happen day to day in our mission. So whether it's, you know, getting people from one place to another, keeping the lights on, working on contracts, doing analysis, all of it, anything you can think of to run an embassy, we've got people that help support us in that mission. So yes, is one of the brand new embassies. It's been a privilege, though, like I said, just to work out here. And so yeah, and then have before I go back to some other Jakarta things, I want to I had this picture of moving boxes because I wanted to say that, you know, before I got to Jakarta and after I leave Jakarta and moving forward in my career, I'm going to pack up all my things. So this crazy rush where everybody comes in and backs up all your things for a couple of days, and you just hope it makes it to your next destination. So that's when I was packing out of Mexico, and just really a symbolic image of the life of a diplomat moving around. So I have this picture. So this is me and a couple of my colleagues, you know, just inside. We had celebrated an event, and yeah. And so those are just like a fun video or fun picture I wanted to share there. So one other really cool historical part of the city is the Istiklal Mosque. So as I mentioned, is Indonesia being a Muslim majority country, of course, Islam is very important. So this is their main mosque. This isn't the greatest picture I had, but when I visited actually an embassy, we got like a little private tour of it, which was great. And so it's a massive courtyard. And one thing that's really cool about the mosque is across the street, literally, is the Catholic Church. So there's like a main cathedral, and that's kind of was on purpose to kind of symbolize like unity and diversity. So that's one of their mottos actually in Indonesia, is like kind of embracing diversity and embracing different viewpoints. And they capture this in what they call Pancasila. So that's kind of, I can't recall all 5 of the pillars of Pancasila, but essentially like diversity and just common ground are really important. And as you can imagine, if you have 17,000 islands, that's going to be critical to like having a sort of cohesion, is making sure that you're respecting individuals' viewpoints and just understanding what all people might be going through, right? So this is the inside of the mosque, and this doesn't do it as much justice as it should. I mean, it's a beautiful mosque inside. I know for folks that practice Islam or have visited other mosques before, I mean, you know, like they're always, many of them are just so like ornate, and this is no exception. It's quite ornate. It's massive compared to the image here, but it's kind of one of the main gates. I mean, this mosque for Friday prayers can probably fit, gosh, like a couple thousand people. They told us when they do that. We visited right before Ramadan, so then we kind of like we're trying to understand some of Indonesia's traditions surrounding Ramadan and like where like how that works here. And so this is part of that like tour. And so yeah, but that just wanted to share a quick image of the inside of the mosque as well. So to return a little bit to work in Jakarta itself, and going back to what I do beyond the basic description, one of the things that's important for us to do as diplomats is to put ourselves out there publicly, right? I mean, if we're doing all these programs, we're doing all these things to try to support U.S. goals, objectives, and mutual goals and objectives, not just U.S., but U.S. and Indonesia, then we want to be out there. So we do public events and engagements and try to get people together, right? One of the powers, I guess, so to say, that we have as a convening power to get people together, to network, to put solutions on the table, and to ultimately arrive at some different ways that we can support each other and help each other. So this is me at an event that I planned out. Obviously didn't do it myself. I had a great team helping me, but it's about women in fintech. So fintech stands for financial technology. So different apps, Venmo's an example of a fintech that you might know. So we had this event, a forum where we had women from across the industry come in, and we brought in the Minister of Finance, we had our ambassador there, and just tried to like get everybody to like have discussions on the challenges that women face in the financial technology field, which was really rewarding and just really a great way to put ourselves out there in terms of diplomacy. So this was funded by headquarters, and we were able to do things to do this, and we do very similar projects all the time across the world. So I just want to share that little piece. And then another part of work that I do that's a little bit more what people might think of what we do is have official meetings and like set them up, prepare our ambassador for them, and then just have the talk. So I'm sitting, of course, that's me. And then the man wearing the orange shirt, we call that a batik shirt. That's the U.S. ambassador to Indonesia, Sung Kim. And then across from us, the woman is Frederica Widiasari, who's one of the commissioners for the Financial Services Authority. And then next to her is one of the heads of the unit. You can't see the commissioner in the background, like the way they took the picture is can't see the chairperson, but it's kind of like we're in meetings and we do this where we're going out the ambassador to his meetings, taking notes, making sure that we prepare him and all that. And on travel, so this is a U.S. Air Force plane. Given Indonesia having so many islands, some of them are pretty difficult to get to normally. So was lucky enough to be able to fly around to one of the more remote islands called Natuna. And yeah, we get the plane in from different bases around the region, and sometimes we just gotta do that. But on the note of travel, because I know also want to cover some of the fun things, I'll get to some pictures of that, broadly speaking. So getting a little bit outside of Jakarta. So this is Bali. And as I mentioned, one of the more famous islands for tourism. And Bali, as many other parts of Indonesia, just has a lot of great diversity, right? In terms of not only people who are around there, but you have the nice beaches and you have like the mountains and you have like a little bit of jungle. So this is me, of course, at the beach. So this good plug for anybody that wants to check out coming to Indonesia. Bali is kind of like that's the main hub, and to get the beach there. So same place, Bali, but now in the mountains, there's 2 volcanoes that are in Bali. It's Mount Batur, which is a volcano, and then there's another Mount Salak. So you can hike up them and like just be around them, and it's really cool. So I actually did a sunrise hike. I got up at like 1 a.m. and drove over and then started hiking up the mountain. So I have pictures of that in a second. But one quick picture is jackfruit. So they have these massive jackfruit like just all around by the volcano area. And so that's one nice thing about being in a tropical country. You get like these fruit that is everywhere. Got papaya, got the mango, etc. So but yeah, it's why I always just found this amusing, just having these massive fruits just like hanging out in the trees. And that's me at the top of Mount Batur, right at sunrise. So it's a really cool vista. I just wanted to show in terms of travel and Indonesia, right? So this is one of the Hindu temples, one of the many Hindu temples. A lot of them, of course, are focused in Bali, but there's like Hindu temples all around the country in various areas. And so that's one of them. And so this is, I'm going to make sure I say it right. It's called Pura Gunung Kawi, which informally is the Valley of the Kings. So these are motifs that are honoring the kings of Bali, right? So this is like all in a rice paddy area, and then they carved out these like kind of shrines within like this rock face area. So it's super cool. And there's another motif of them. So that's the Valley of the Kings, so to say. And in the Valley of the Kings, there's also like rice paddies, and just all of these like really cool vistas from Bali. So just wanted to share that. And then continuing on Bali, this is also gonna look at the notes here. Pura Tirta Empul. So it's informally known as the water temple because it's set up kind of in an area that gets natural mountain spring water, and so they set up a temple to do cleansing ceremonies, and they believe that if you shower in this water, that like you'll have like good fortune and health. So this is me at the temple. I'm wearing a sarong, and so for those of you who might have been around Asia or been to temples before, like, you have to wear a sarong, even if you're wearing pants, and sometimes you have to like put that on. So that's why I'm wearing that in particular. And then this is just like a nice picture inside the temple. And so this is that water ceremony that I was kind of mentioning just now, where people will go and they let tourists do it. You have to do they have like a whole ritual you have to do, but like they let tourists do it. So you go in, and then they have a specific way they guide you on like just bathing and how you bathe and cleanse. You do it with like some clothes on, of course, but so that's something people do. You could do it if you went to Bali. So this is like just a cool way of sharing their traditions with us. And I didn't do it, but my friends did, so I just kind of watched them, and it's really cool to see. So the monkey forest is another one of the highlights of Bali. And monkeys are all around the island and in general around Indonesia. So this type of monkey, I believe, is the macaque. And so this is a picture of me and my friends with this monkey selfie. I wasn't enthused about the monkey being that close to us, but did the selfie, right? You gotta do the selfie. So that's us, me and a couple of friends and a monkey. So this gets into, gonna jump a little bit to Sumatra. And so super quickly, because I know I also want to leave time to answer questions about everything. They're wearing traditional batak, dress. So in North Sumatra, where this thing I was at is at, the Bataknese people live in like by and around Lake Toba, which is the world's largest volcanic lake. And so I went to an event there. For lack of time, I won't go into like the deep dive of the event, but just wanted to share a little bit of example of traditional dress. And yeah. And this kind of going on, but the Batak theme, this is an island in the middle of the lake, where there's like a traditional center. And so the man speaking there on that bottom right is, I guess, the cultural leader, like the elder of this like area. And you have like the Batak society, they have like these houses, the two tips. It's pretty famous across Indonesia in general. But the houses are supposed to face the mountains, they said, because of like they're always supposed to like kind of, they connect their history a lot to mountains. Obviously a lot more I could say about that, but I just kind of want to give you a piece of that culture and just how different Indonesia really is. So and then hopping a little bit back to animals, have just also want to highlight Indonesia's biodiversity. It's a really incredibly diverse country in terms of culture, but also in terms of animals. So there are 259 mammals, 382 birds, and 172 amphibians that are all endemic to Indonesia. That is to say, you can only find those animals in Indonesia. It's really just mind-blowing how many animals like have like really like lived here for so long. And so I just wanted to highlight 3 of the most, I guess, popular, well-known endemic animals. So this is the Komodo dragon, which I'm sure you probably have heard about. And so they're all in one island called Komodo. And you can go, if you're visiting Indonesia, you can actually go to the national park where these dragons are. There's not a ton of them left, unfortunately. There's conservation efforts to try to like have more of them around, but it's pretty difficult. So that's one thing you can do. The other, of course, the Sumatran tiger, which I think a lot of us also might be familiar with, in the island of Sumatra. And there's a massive efforts to try to help like reestablish the population, because they are really in danger of going extinct. So I know there's a lot of programs. I think some of my colleagues are working on those programs, and the international community is really trying to help save the Sumatran tiger population. Then, of course, I'm pretty sure most of us are familiar with this endemic species, orangutan. So there's a couple of different orangutans that are endemic to Indonesia, and of course, big conservation efforts for orangutans. And you can go as part of tourism to different habitats, some of them of which you gotta do like a river cruise, and then you talk with the scientists and whatnot. And then you can go and like hike through the jungle and see the orangutans as well. So I just kind of went through many things, and I've talked a lot. So I also want to just give an opportunity for folks to ask questions, and however you want to take this conversation on. So with that, I'll stop sharing and hand it over to Dr. Cruz.
Well, thank you so much, Lester. I don't know if it's strange, but I think those Komodo dragons are adorable. Very cool, very cool. And also very, very neat to see you just hanging out with the ambassador. How amazing to have an OU student that just gets to kind of hang out, or former OU student hanging out with the ambassador. Well, as Lester said, we are going to take some time for some Q&A. And if you want to add your question into the Q&A box there, some of you have already started doing so, and I will pose those to Lester. We might not get to all of them, and we'll try to do what we can do. And we will go past one a little bit if there's still some interest in doing so. But let me start off, Lester. You have showcased some beautiful pictures. We spent time in Jakarta, and you mentioned Mexico as well. How do you, as an American, as someone that was raised in Oklahoma, how do you prepare to go into a different society with different cultures? What's the process there and the mind frame that you need to take on to do that successfully?
Wow, that's a great question. I mean, the process kind of changes based on where you're going, of course. You have to kind of have a sense of what that culture's priorities are, what their things they like and don't like are. So Indonesia, for example, is they they're not always direct about things. And so in some ways you have to learn how to adjust to that. And that's not a bad thing. It's just a different thing. And that's another mentality you have to approach things with too, is like, there's obviously going to be differences. And what I do is I try to, read as much as I can, but that's never going to tell you everything. And I just kind of go into it just open-minded, try to understand as much as I can going into it. And then you just have to have a lot of humility. I've like messed things up. Of course, I've like probably said the wrong thing. But I've listened to, local experts around me. I've, done what I can to take those steps to understand what's going on. And but I think a lot of it too is just having practice doing it. And you don't necessarily have to like be overseas to do it. I think, if you're in Oklahoma or wherever else you're situated, you can kind of go into a different, like volunteer in a different community you haven't been in before and get a sense of like, how do I work with people who are different than me? And I find that like, for me, it's like almost like training a muscle, right? It's like the more you do it, the better you prepared you are for changes. The first couple, like when I went to Italy with you, Dr. Cruz, I mean, it was like so different. And, in my head, I was like, oh, like, Western Europe, it's like, same as the US, and it's not, right? And you kind of just have to flex that muscle. And I think just jump into it sometimes. But yeah, so I'll leave it there because I know we have many questions. It looks like.
Well, I do have one that I have to ask, that someone asked us, anonymous, if the monkey took the selfie.
No, so the trick is the ranger holds like a peanut, and then the monkeys like reaches for it. But the monkeys, they all know this is going to happen because there's so many selfies. So then they're like, okay, so I will stand here and reach for this, so then the humans can take the photo, and then they'll take the photo. Yeah.
So it's staged. Fair enough. Yeah. You learned Indonesian to go. What dialect do you speak?
So in Indonesian, it's a pretty formal dialect. I'd say like if most formal registered, because our foreign service language training usually focuses on the most formal types. I know there's some varieties and like, but they call it unofficially Bahasa, like kayu, or like wooden Bahasa, like so stiff. Like, so whenever I always get a lot of jokes whenever I speak, because everyone's like, what are you speaking so formal for? But that said, there's a lot of different varieties. And then of course, Malaysia also speaks Bahasa, but then they have like some similar words that I understand. And I'm like, but no, I very formal Bahasa.
Nice. Well, kind of related to that, we've got a couple of questions asking not just about how you interact with new cultures, but what your first week was like, your transition to Jakarta in Indonesia. Did you have some culture shock? What was the first week, first couple of months like for you?
Yeah, so the first week was in quarantine because they had the quarantine things coming in. But in general, to address like, did I have culture shock and how did I adjust? I think the privilege of working at the embassy is that they set up so many things for us. Like we have our housing, we have our place we're going to go work. We have like some general sense of what's going on. So that really alleviates a lot of what would be the shock culturally. And I think after living in Mexico City, which was also a really huge city, I kind of got used to the idea of people just being around all the time. Growing up in Oklahoma City, going to school and more, it's like not really people around everywhere. But you live in Mexico City, you live here, everywhere, all noise, people, and I like that. And that's why I sought out. And so for me, especially after living in Mexico, the adjustment of like having everybody around and like the chaos of it, I suppose, I was like, okay. I think just little things like how to order food on the app. I'm like, okay, like they're using some shorthand. I don't really understand this, or get directions. I'm like, all right, like hopefully I get this right, because my address is a little weird. So then, so I'd say smaller things. But in terms of like the broader like adjustments, like I kind of just hit the ground running, and in a privileged spot because I work at the embassy.
How long would you say it took you to kind of feel like you got your footing, or do you still feel like you're in that process?
Oh, I think it was probably a few months before I really got my footing. I was like, okay, here's my routines, here's how I do things. And COVID was difficult because we had basically lockdown in the last summer. And so then I had to like get my footing and then stay at home all day and then regain the footing post COVID and navigate like, you know, traffic is at 30 million people in the metro area, traffic's out of control, right? And then just with work, right, meeting all of my contacts on Zoom and trying to have conversations on Zoom is just not going to be the same at some level. Another cultural thing in Indonesia is like this very relationship-based society, right? So it's like you're much more effective meeting face to face and like to talk about important issues. And that was also just kind of difficult to like find that footing, like, okay, we've talked on Zoom, but how do we meet in person? And like just getting reintroduced to like doing diplomatic receptions again and hanging out with people again. Yeah.
Yeah, we've had similar experiences on campus. So we have what I think is a really nice question. What made you want to start traveling? And weren't you a little nervous or scared? And do you still get nervous and scared going into new environments and new countries?
Yeah, wow, that's a great question. I mean, I got into traveling because I was always curious about what was outside of Oklahoma. Again, like I do have love for the state, and I really did appreciate all the opportunities and things I've done in Oklahoma. But yeah, I just was curious, and I was like, you know what, I just had to do it. And the first couple of times, super nervous. Yeah, when I went to Italy, like I flew. Well, I didn't fly by myself. I flew with Robin, and that was like first time on an international flight. I was super nervous. And then when I studied abroad in Jordan, I think that was when I really cut my teeth and like just like was like, okay, this is hard. And like I'm speaking Arabic, which is pretty hard language. And I'm figuring out, I've got a housing, gotta figure out how to get to school. I gotta figure out how to like do everything else. So I'd say the first couple times, but especially Jordan, really put a lot of nerves aside. I'm like, okay, at the end of the day, it's gonna get figured out. Sometimes it won't. Sometimes like, I gotta try to get my visa renewed and it just won't happen that day. That's life. And then stuff like that. But I'd say now I don't really get too nervous. I think I've kind of built an internal system of how I prepare to travel and go and do things. But I'd say it did take me like having a couple of like really, I'm not gonna say tough, but definitely times where I was challenged by my environment around me.
We also have a lot of questions about your language learning. I know you took some language at OU, Arabic, and perhaps some Spanish, but obviously for this appointment, you had to learn Indonesian. What was that process, and how long did it take you to learn it?
So I'm not the most gifted language learner. I I did learn Indonesian online because of COVID, and it was actually, it was quite tough, frankly, to like retain a language on Zoom. Yeah, so I did it for 6 months, and I could get around. My Spanish is much better because I did it in person and in Mexico City, actually, as a part of a pilot program. So that was also a 6-month program as well. But yeah, with learning languages, I'm not the most gifted, which is surprising probably to some people, given that I'm a diplomat. But that said, a lot of learning languages is finding out like what the system is in the language and just not being afraid to like put myself out there. Here, I make mistakes. I when I learned Spanish, I was like, all right, I just have to accept it. Because Arabic, I was like, of course I make mistakes. Spanish, of course I make mistakes, except just professionally. And then that was the biggest roadblock that I had, was because you don't want to make mistakes. It's natural when you're like, I don't want to say the wrong thing. But that's why I pushed through and learned some of these languages.
Wonderful. How would you say that the those in Indonesia and Jakarta in particular perceive you or perceive Americans when they
No,
come into interaction with them, or tourists, perhaps?
great question. No, Indonesians are extremely warm and friendly. They very much do like Americans. Important note in terms of policy wise, they're a non-aligned country, right? So they also like, I guess so to say, countries that may not share the same values as the U.S., but they're warm and friendly in general, like perhaps like very much part of the culture. They, like many places, know a lot about just like little things about American culture that like you would never have guessed. To get somebody in a taxi, I was telling them I'm from Oklahoma, and they're like, "Oh yeah, like Oklahoma City Thunder." I was like, "Oh, all right." So they followed it. I had like multiple ministers when I'm with the ambassador. I'm like, "Yeah, I'm from Oklahoma." Like, I just signed bar my intro, and they're like telling me just like random things. I'm like, about the US, about Oklahoma. So no, people are very receptive and friendly and warm here. It's really a great atmosphere in terms of like day-to-day life, and people just really like to see Americans out and about. But of course, Bali, I think that sometimes in Bali they're like, Americans, and the Australians are kind of the ones that kind of get in trouble because it's for Australians, just like since they're so close, that's their main kind of going out and like beachy kind of area. So, but overall, no, but they're very friendly. People are like very receptive here. Americans.
Wonderful. Also, some questions about some of the local dishes, what your favorite food is in Jakarta. And then, of course, we have to ask, do you have a lot of availability of Tex-Mex or Oklahoma food, chicken fried steak, anything along those lines that you might miss?
Oh, wow. So the second one first, there's not really Tex-Mex here, no. Yeah, there's a couple of taco places. But luckily there's a lot of great food like from around Asia. So great Japanese, great Korean food, great Vietnamese food, great Malay food. Yeah, and then in terms of my favorite Indonesian dishes, I love some satay. So that's just like grilled chicken or grilled beef kebabs, very simple, straightforward, and a tasty peanut sauce. I love it. I should put some pictures of food. I'm sorry. I just not thought about that. And I like rendang. So rendang is it's like beef cubes, like not brisket style, but kind of like a roast. And then they put in a curry, kind of akin to like how they do for Indian dishes with like the curries. Then there's bakso. I like that. So it's kind of like the soup with like little meatballs in it. All the food's pretty good though. I really do enjoy it. So can't complain.
That's always some of the best parts about international travel, right? Is getting to try the food. Just kind of moving aside or taking a step, we have some questions about your career path that folks that may not be super familiar with the Department of State and how that works. But could you explain very briefly, I know we're getting close on time, how you applied, how you got sent to Indonesia, and then where your next stop, maybe you'll be on a rotation. So do you know yet, and how much say do you get in determining where you're going next?
Oh, wow. Big question. Yeah. And then also, I mean, I'm happy to I know other people might have to go, but I'm happy to stay on as well and keep talking. I know I see like 45 questions in the Q&A. So happy to stay on for how long people are interested in. But to answer the question, yeah. So I applied for the Pickering and Wrangell at the same time, because you can apply for both. There's no restriction. My senior year. And for that, what made me competitive was frankly going to Jordan, being able to prove like, hey, like I was in a country that's not the easiest place to be. Not to say there's anything wrong with Jordan, but like a place that's not conventional, or like that may not be as like a typical study abroad experience. And then I was able to make it, and like my Arabic grades weren't hot, I'll be honest, but I stuck through it. And like I was like, look, I'll stick it out. Like I'm not going to quit on something that's a hard language, and as a diplomat, you really have to show that you're willing to stick it out. Because we in the Foreign Service Institute, we do Arabic for 2 years, we do Mandarin for 2 years, we do Japanese for 2 years. So it's like you have to prove that you're able to stick things out like that to learn languages and get to a level where we can be effective diplomats, right? And so the process for the more technical process is you have a set of essays to kind of describe like what you bring to the table as what you would bring to the table as a Foreign Service officer. And of course, my tips are always focusing on curiosity, right? Like focusing on what you do locally. I think a lot of people get hung up on trying to draw on their 1 or 2 international experiences, when like if you volunteered for like a refugee organization in Oklahoma, like that's very much relevant. And that's where that's incredibly helpful to prove that you're able to work in cross-cultural contexts. Of course, writing skills, like I always, even to this day, for many things, I still have multiple people review my writing. Or at least if I don't do multiple people review my writing, I take a second look at fresh eyes if there's a possibility to. That's really key. Writing, grammar, because you have to write effectively, you have to write quickly. Like when an ambassador wants the paper done, you absolutely have to do it. And the stakes get higher as if we have the president ever visit the country, it's like the stakes are incredibly high, and you have to be able to write and and just work effectively under pressure. So basically, you have a set of like questions that kind of prove, like you kind of like show, like demonstrate those skills, and then if you advance to the there's an interview process after that. It's very set up very much similar to like the Foreign Service oral exam, because they want people who will pass the oral exam, so they make the interview for the fellowships more or less the same. Sat down with two former diplomats and just had to explain why I was going to be a good foreign service officer. And then there's a writing exercise where they give you a policy, like, hey, you have 30 minutes, write a policy brief about this and explain your points. You're like, okay. So those are kind of like the things, like as you're going through, for folks, I guess they're studying right now and interested in this career path, like sharpening your writing skills, sharpening your analysis skills, any sort of ways to demonstrate leadership is always good. And so like that's kind of the basic process, is essays, and then when you get to the interview itself, generally some sort of writing exercise and an interview with senior retired diplomats, sometimes even current diplomats. And yeah, so that's the technical process of that. They might have changed it slightly since I did the process several years ago. And also for the picking and wrangle, you also kind of need to demonstrate you're going to get into grad school, because that's part of the whole package, right? Is paying for grad school. And they have certain grad schools, basically the consortium of international relations schools that you can apply to. So you can't just necessarily apply to every school, but they have some flexibility. But that's something also to keep in mind, is you can't necessarily apply to every school if you're going to apply for the fellowships.
Okay. And where to next, Lester? Do you know yet?
Oh, yes. Yeah. The process. Sorry, I forgot about that second part of the question. So I probably end up in Washington, D.C. I'm actually applying right now in the mix of the process for that. And it's like a job within the job interview within a job interview. So you get like all the assignments. It's like a huge list, and then you just pick, in my case, just what you're interested in, and you send like statements of interest or resume, and then we talk to like people and like lobby, and like you get reviews from your friends and your supervisors. But that applies third tour and beyond. So the first two tours are guided. So they give you a list and they're like, all right, everybody's going to one of these, arrange them how you want. And then you do that for the first two times, and then they give you more freedom to really go and like lobby for yourself where you want to go. And people guide those decisions based on, whether it's schools, whether it's like the type of job, whether it's like where partners can work or not, like not within the embassy or outside. And those are all considerations, by the way, for this career path. Like it's a choice for you, it's a lifestyle for you and for your family. So like that's just like something that they look for in the screening process too, is like, are you realistic about this? It's not just going to Paris, right? It's like we send people to like the Congo, right? We send people all over the world, and that's being realistic and having that like ready is important.
Wonderful. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. There are a number of questions that didn't get answered. And what we're going to do is keep a recording of those. And then Lester will take a few minutes and respond to those, and we'll send those out via email. Michael Ruby, in particular, your questions are fantastic, but they are going to take a little bit of answering. So Lester will be in contact on those. So I just want to hand it back over to you, Lester, to give our send off, or if there's anything that you'd like to say in terms of wrapping up.
Yeah, no, wow. Thank you again for this opportunity. And I hope you all learned a little bit about Jakarta, about Indonesia. Yeah, I know, like Dr. Cruz said, we'll try to get to some of those questions. I was just, trying to answer the questions that as I'm talking. So I know there's a lot that I'll try to answer, and I really do want to answer them. And no, but thank you for joining today. I know, obviously, you're busy with school, with work, wherever you're joining from. I'm really appreciative of, sharing my life, right? It's all about me, but I know I hope that, you got some great insight, and yeah, I look forward to hopefully doing more events like this and just being able to interact with you all. And yeah, I know it's definitely in general with international relations, and you look at the world, it's real tough, but I do promise two things. The first is that there are good people working around the world on the issues that matter for Americans and for our global community. I'd like to think I'm one of them, but in general, there are definitely good people doing this. And two, you are good people. And if you want to do this, I really encourage that you do, because we do need people that represent the totality and the diversity of America. So I know I didn't get to talk a lot about the recruitment side of it, but please do whatever it is in your lives, in your careers, in your studies, consider their national perspective, and just know that around the world, there are people that are rooting for us, and we want to be good to them and also have good people to work with them.
Wonderful. Well, we cannot thank you enough, Lester. You are indeed good people, and we are so happy that you were willing to connect with us. It's 1 a.m. there. You are off the clock. Feel free to settle down for the evening. I just want to thank you again, to thank our colleagues at the Office of Alumni Engagement for including us in this discussion, and all of our guests that were able to attend. We really appreciate your engagement and the fact that you showed up. And we will have more of these events. The Office of Alumni Engagement will have more Sooners around the world, and so hopefully you will join at that time. Thank you so much, and have a good rest of your day.
Yeah, have a great day, everyone.